Okay. So first, I'm sorry that I didn't get this stuff to you earlier. We were writing on the last day, but I hope that some of you have been able. Has anybody not been able to read it? Good. I guess the way I think we should start probably is, do you have any, I would like to go like in page by page, okay? And if people have issues, we'll stop them and just write it down. How's that sound?
That's fine, but can I make a suggestion?
Sure.
And that is, I know people are watching this, and people should be aware that we all have a draft of a potential final report that we're commenting on. Because it's a draft, it's nothing that we've released, but you're going to hear us talking about different proposals and recommendations and findings and things like that. And this is all in anticipation of us agreeing that the language should be the final report. But I just want people to understand we are all looking at a draft that is not publicly available at the moment.
Thank you. And it is. Hi, Mary Kate. How are you?
Good, thank you.
And I would like to just say, we don't want to spend our time wordsmithing. Let us just look at the meat of what we're talking about. And if you have ways in which you would like to see the verbiage changed, we can do that. You can send it to me and we'll do that. Is that agreeable for everybody? Yes, Nancy?
I mean, I'll be a minority here. I'm not sure going line by line is a terrific use.
Oh, no, I mean, no, we're not. Yeah. Oh, thank you for that.
Well, I think that's what you said.
Say more.
I thought you said you wanted to go line by line, which I don't think
no.
is a good use of our
I
time.
think I want to go by the recommendations. We attempted to put down what we had seen, and then I think the most important thing is to get some consensus on the recommendations that we have now. And if there's, yes.
Yeah, so I mean, what I was going to say was, I think before we even parse it down to that level, maybe just talk about some overall, people's overall take on it, that, sort of goes to the overall way it was constructed. And first of all, I have to say that, I feel like I'm in absolutely no position to complain about anything, given the fact that you guys took on a tremendous task by writing this, and I didn't volunteer. So I feel, guilty about, some of the comments, but, to make this into a team effort, I think will be helpful. And one thing that I am willing to do, not for, at least for the comments that I and probably Paul have about it, I'm willing to circulate a red line later on, not today, but within the next week, circulate a red line about that. But I have a couple of general overall comments about it, just in terms of the overarching message that it has. And I wonder if I could start with that before we look at recommendations.
Is everybody agreeable to that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, go ahead.
So I think it's two overarching things. One is, you clearly made an effort to talk about recovery in some places, but I think recovery needs to be much more of an overarching theme. DEMIS is a recovery model system. Everything that DEMIS does is based on recovery. And I don't think there was enough emphasis on that. And I think I think that should be something said right up front, that this should be recovery focused. And there are lots of places within the report itself where I think there should be a lot more discussion about recovery. And then the should I go on, or anybody have comments about
I'm
that?
listening. I'm just not looking for a pen. Sorry.
I just didn't know if people wanted to say something about that before I move into my second overarching theme.
I would agree with that, Nancy, that it doesn't focus recovery at all. And there's very little, it seems like the patients or the people that reside there kind of got pushed into small corners.
Yeah, well, that was
Well,
my second.
could you say more about that? Because, I think, let me just, since I will confess that I wrote a lot of this. Where would you like to see more, and what would you like to see?
Everywhere. Every
Well-
recommendation should be based upon recovery. When you talk about there at the bottom of page 1, there were 3 overarching themes that arose from our analysis and drove the specific recommendations. Well, recovery is the main overarching theme. And I think every place where you talk about what you want to do should be like the second page, the recommendation. There's when you talk about appropriate long-term care in a secure setting that is safe, healthy, and conducive to creating diverse environments and security zones. Well, gosh, that's just where recovery should be the primary theme, not security, but recovery. So there's like every place you turn people should get sick of seeing the word recovery when they're reading this thing.
I think the word healing, I'm not sure I agree necessarily, and I'm not the obviously expert in this area, but I think recovery and healing in places like that the sentence you just alluded to it's a good place for it. I guess the one question I would ask is, should addressing recovery or emphasis on recovery, and I'm curious, I'd love to hear Lori's opinion on this one, is that should that be a fourth, I guess, element of the conditions, culture, operations, and then emphasis on recovery. In other words, as opposed to putting it everywhere, to your point, which is non-specific, is there just a separate section, a paragraph or 2 to address it? Because I think the other things, I would just argue that I think all the other things, the recommendations are very, very, very important. And I don't necessarily think we want to take away from that. If I was asked to go assess an acute care hospital that had physical plant issues and had poor morale issues and had a lot of safety concerns and quality concerns and all of that, and also, oh, by the way, you're not even treating the patients that well. Yeah, that's important, but all the other stuff's important. So I would just gently, I guess, push back a little bit. But again, I'm not the expert. I do want Laura's opinion on this particular point because she's more of an expert, I guess.
So I guess I would say that it sounds like there's a place for a happy medium with that. I think the intention here is to get a shell together, a template that we can then, obviously interject and add information to. And there's certainly places, Nancy, like you mentioned, where particularly with respect to the services at the hospital and that those should all be geared toward recovery and things like that. But I do agree with John that there are other aspects that where sort of cramming the word recovery in may look like we're trying to cram the word recovery in. I mean, for one thing, accountability is, kind of more specific to people providing oversight and management being accountable for the things that they do and things of that nature. So, I guess that's, suffice it to say that I think there's a place for a happy medium there, that it may not have to interject its way into every paragraph in a way that would kind of look obvious and not meaningful. But there's certainly, I'm sure when you and Paul provide comments, there'll be places that it can be folded in to have a more overarching perspective.
I would say, in case some of you have already noticed, some of your very words are here. We took them from the minutes. We took them from reviewing the videos. And so your words are actually here. And I would just, using healing, but successful return to the community. Recovery means very different things, meeting the highest level of functioning that they can. Those are all, that may not be in legal, but that is in healthcare.
But recovery is a term of art. in mental health care.
And how would you define recovery?
It's different for every person. Paul, do you want to talk
Absolutely.
about that? But the word recovery has very specific meanings. And that's the word that's used. It is a term of art. Healing is not the same thing. Recovery is the guiding principle. The guiding
Right.
principle is
And-
not healing.
And there's a huge difference between recovery and healing, because recovery means that the person is moving forward with their lives without necessarily the absence of what we call symptoms. So the person may still be hearing voices and they're moving forward. That doesn't mean that they're healed or that there's healing that took place. And so, I think that those are major, even if you look at the recovery model that Demas has, right? So, according to the recovery model, the person who's receiving services is supposed to be in the driver's seat. And what traditionally ends up happening is we put them in the child safety seat, and we become very risk averse in the care that goes forward from there. And, an example of this might be someone who, decides, I want to try and heal through holistic means. I don't want to take medications. We're supposed to honor that. And in fact, it's in the law that we honor that. Yet what usually happens is that's used as evidence that the person is mentally incompetent. And so therefore we go and force meds on them. And the person ends up not being in the driver's seat. And so I think that we need to take a look at, is there a recovery oriented model of care that's happening at CVH and Whiting Forensic Hospital?
I would just like to interject a thought here. Taking your example, Paul, we have referred here to the highest level of functioning. That means you can be hearing voices, and you can be going to work, and you have to, kinds of things like that. Recovery is reaching the highest level of functioning that you're capable of. And re-entering successfully, returning to the community is actually the goal of recovery, is it not?
So yes and no. And here's kind of the nuance of that. Recovery is the person, achieving their highest, as you said, level of functioning. However, that doesn't mean that things shouldn't be happening when they're not at that place. Because usually what happens is you have to get to a level of functioning before you can do something. And so the person may want to pursue education at that time. Even in my own example, I had someone say, well, we understand you want to get back to work, but until you take your meds regularly, we aren't going to pursue that. And the thing is, as soon as I say I want to get back to work, that should be the goal of the treatment team, right? That we should be working on that. And it's not that the treatment team shouldn't be gatekeepers.
We don't say someone has recovered. We say someone is in recovery, and it's very similar to what people talk about with abuse. I'm sorry, with drugs. You're in recovery. You haven't recovered, and it's going to be different for each person, and it's going to change along the way.
Dr. Otis.
I have just, so I don't want to, I mean, with all due respect, first of all, Nancy said she had two things. I'd like to hear what her second thing is. And I also want to be sensitive to, and Mike, I might need your help on this, and Linda, just to go back to our charge, I guess. I don't want to, I feel a little uncomfortable in all honesty. I'm not necessarily, I don't necessarily disagree with the comments, but I'm not sure my job in this task force, or our job particularly, was to define recovery for the caregivers. And I think it's important to emphasize it. I'm okay with that. I think, putting it in with the word and or at least the discussion of what it is in some meaningful way in the report is important. But I don't think this was our task. And I'm sure you could, respectfully disagree with me, but I think we had a fairly specific task. I think the report as written addresses a lot of those things, and I felt actually pretty good about it, with minimal comment actually or changes. I don't want to get totally sidetracked, I guess. But Nancy, I do want to hear what your other thing was. And
Well, Paul pretty much alluded to what my other thing was, which this is written more from the perspective of what the healthcare providers need, as opposed to what the residents of the facilities need. And that's the perspective that certainly my charge on this task force is to be focused on. And I hear what you're saying, that our charge doesn't say recovery, but in terms of how you look at what we envision Whiting and CVH will be in the future, it's still got to be from a perspective that is patient-centered and recovery-based. Because that's what DEMIS purports to do. And that's not something that we want to change. We want to build from that.
I love those words, by the way, patient-centered, recovery-based, just like that. I would suggest we actually do put that somewhere in here besides some of the other comments. So that we covered both your comments? I'm sorry, that's it. I won't say another word.
I just want to push back a little that I think it is our charge, right? Our charge is the culture and looking at the culture of CVH and Whiting. And so I think that orientation goes directly to culture.
Could you just go to page 3 and look at those little bullets there and tell me which ones are offensive to you?
I don't think that's a fair way of putting it, Linda. We didn't say if anything was offensive. We just.
But you did. You said we didn't address recovery, but it is here in various forms.
I said that it wasn't specific enough, that the general comment at the beginning needs to be talking about a recovery-based system, and that that everything that we do has to be based on recovery. It's not that it's offensive, it's just that it's missing a component. And I can understand, I hear what Lori said and John about not needing to beat the dead horse by putting it in every sentence. But each thing that we do in terms of, like Paul said, culture change has got to be from a recovery-based orientation, and it needs to be explicit.
Yes, Dr. House.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a piece to this, maybe a wrinkle, in that part of the difficulty and the challenge in working in a forensic setting in particular is dovetailing that patient-centered perspective with the charge of the courts, right? And I think that's a reality that we can't ignore or step away from. We strive to have everything be patient-centered and have their involvement in the treatment that we provide, whether it's restoring somebody to competency or treating their illness so that they're no longer a danger to self or others, so they can be released to the community. All that is nestled in the courts, the connection to the court. And we have a specific charge, and sometimes there are things that we have to do that may not be in line with what the patient in front of us wants, but that are part of our responsibility as forensic professionals. So I just want to make sure that it's clear that it is absolutely, DEMIS is a recovery organization, everything's patient-centered, but there's also that other piece of sometimes there are things that we have to do that aren't necessarily in line with what a person in our care may want.
So,
Yes,
but
Paul.
it isn't the charge of the court to provide treatment?
For a specific purpose, yes. To restore somebody competency or to achieve a level of stability where they no longer pose a danger to society, so they can be released.
Well,
I would just like to,
Can I give an example like of what I mean? Like, so sometimes people come to us for competency who don't want to be restored to competency. So their goal is not to be restored, but we are tasked with that charge from the court to assess their competency, to say whether they have these capacities, and to give an honest opinion about that. So sometimes these things are at adversary with one another. And so there has to be a place to recognize that and to say that both of those things are important.
well,
That doesn't mean
Nancy?
we throw away the recovery model or patient-centered, right? That's not what I'm trying to say. I just mean I want to make sure that it's acknowledged that the reality of that challenge that we're faced with.
and that also goes to what you did say in the report, that there are some of us who don't believe in that coercive nature of the PSRB, and think it should be abolished, because coercion
Or treatment in general.
because forced treatment, coercion doesn't work. So you can't really use coercion and recovery in the same sentence.
are you referring to a specific place in this report, or is it just I'm wondering if we're arguing about semantics and not understanding that when I talk about a continuum of care, when we talk about it, when we identify it here on page 3, a stated goal of both safety and recovery and a pathway towards community reintegration.
Yeah, I mean, that's one place where you used it. But I'm saying that it needs to be more of an overarching theme. Because that's what I was talking about. I said, let's talk about overarching themes before we get into going through each topic. And so that's what I think the overarching theme should be. Change the culture so that it's a recovery-based culture.
How would you like to proceed? Shall we just say, why don't you make your edits as you want, and we'll have to discuss it at another meeting, but
Can I offer a suggestion? Can I offer a suggestion? So I think there's maybe 2 things that need to happen. Like, one, I think we need to make sure that we sort of all agree generally on the specific recommendations that are made, and if there's any of those that are at issue, we should address those while we're all here. And then the wordsmithing or adding in additional verbiage and the redlining, as you said, Nancy, like that should probably happen afterward, and then we can kind of come. But I think probably so I appreciate I think those are good places to start with the overarching themes that you presented, Nancy. I appreciate that. Maybe we should, unless other people have overarching things to talk about, maybe we should talk about the recommendations as we go through, and if there are any that people like said, oh, I didn't think we agreed on that, or that's not kind of consistent with the way I saw things, and then leave the wordsmithing to later.
I guess that's probably the best we can think of today, is to leave here with at least some consensus, an agreement that the findings, the recommendations that we have are within your understanding of what we are recommending. So we can just talk about recommendations. That the rest of it is wordsmithing. Is that Is that agreeable to everyone? Is it not agreeable to anyone? All right, let us proceed. When you look at the physical plant, that's our first the findings. I'm missing page 2. Hold on here. Let's look at the recommendations for that part of the report. Okay. What we wanted to do, I mean, it was very hard, really, let me just say that, how to organize this. We could just lay down our recommendations and be done with it, but we thought by going into a discussion or what were the findings, what did we see? And now we have on page 2 the recommendations. And does anybody have a problem with? I think we lifted some of this right out of our discussions to try to capture individuals' concerns and the things that we would like to see happening going forward. So could we go to page 2? Is there any on the recommendations?
So a couple of things. Number one, we're 100% confident that the data that we have in there is accurate, right? The number of beds, et cetera.
That was actually taken out of the information we were given.
I got you. Do we know, and did it not change recently? It's like one.
We
section.
actually put that in later.
Okay, all right.
No, it's so the capacity, the 91 and the 138, like that's accurate. But then if you see at the bottom, there's a footnote that says second long-term treatment unit was
got it. Okay. Got
temporarily closed,
See a
bringing the current
footnote.
capacity down to 79 beds. Now, we've been told that that's going to reopen
Okay.
sometime
Got it.
in the near future, but
And I think it would be appropriate to point out that Hal Smith was at the time the chief executive officer. Is not there at the moment, as I understand. Maybe just say that the former or something like that, just so that we're accurate as it stands at the moment. It was too technical.
Well, in this particular instance, he was.
Right.
Are you talking about the
Talking about when
paragraph
you're-
about?
Yes.
Where are you talking about?
Talking about on June 17th, 2019, the meeting with the chief executive. I think it might be just appropriate to put in the then.
It's
Then,
he
just add the word
presented
then.
to us on that day.
I know. I'm just
You
pointing
just
out that
say
he's no
then.
longer in that role. I think it's because people are reading this. They have no idea about this stuff. Just pointing out, just an indication the guy's not in charge anymore. He's not the
Just
guy.
say then, chief
Yeah,
executive.
that's all. That's all.
officer.
That's all I'm saying.
Just add that
all
one
I'm
word.
saying.
All right. Okay. Then is in there.
Okay.
So. Any other comments on those recommendations?
I would just comment, I thought this, I'm sorry, Nancy.
Go
Go ahead. Go
I'll
ahead.
just, speaking out of turn. I actually thought this section was excellent. I thought it captured a lot of what we said and saw. So I would just, commend you guys. I kind of heard, I heard my own words in here somewhere. So maybe now I get what you did. But I think it certainly captures the essence. It also captures, in large part, even the comments Nancy made about what the environment's supposed to be like, including emphasis on recovery and using my word healing, of course, but using her word recovery. And I get the distinction, by the way, and I appreciate the distinction, Paul. Thank you for clarifying that for me. That was actually very helpful. But I thought the section was great.
Well, we have some comments about, but I'm not going to wordsmith it. Like you said, this isn't wordsmithing. We'll do some edits and we'll send them back to you. But I do think there's some more overarching concern about the last bullet point. We didn't all agree to that.
What? What is that?
About having modified units, cottages or apartment style.
Yes, we did discuss that.
we
it.
discussed it, but we never agreed to
We
it.
didn't
And
agree. We
and
didn't all agree.
Wait
And
a
in-
minute, wait a minute. I don't have all my stuff in front of me. but
Right.
There was a time when you talked about that transition for going forward. But if you're dead set against that recommendation, then I think we should have a vote on
we-
it.
So,
I-
Linda, I appreciate that because we did talk about it, but I made the comment at the time that if it was something that they wanted to do, they could just do it. They don't need legislative approval to do it.
Well,
And
can I just take issue with that? briefly? And that is, first of all, everything costs money, right? And they need things to be budgeted, right? So if it's a good idea, and if we feel like we want to recommend that as an approach or an additional option, I mean, ultimately, when all is said and done, you don't need statutory language to do it, but you need budgetary language. And I think, to me, one of the goals of this entire enterprise is to try and grab the attention of legislators, people in the governor's office, journalists, everybody. Just say, like, there's some real problems here that need to be addressed. And here are some recommendations. Some of them require a change in the law, others require a change in the budget, and still others require a change in awareness or attitudes about this stuff. So I think if it's a good idea, it needs to be emphasized if we believe that it's something that would be helpful. And whether or not, that's all.
I think there was some pushback because you thought it was going to happen on the grounds of CVH. That's
Right.
why we did not put it there.
Mhm.
It's not there.
The cottages are on the grounds of CVH.
No, there
Right.
can be cottages anywhere.
Right.
Yeah, but the
The
cottages
idea-
that they're referring to are on CVH.
I'm not
Linda-
referring to them.
Linda, can I
Yes.
interject? Please? So my memory of it was, we had this discussion, and yes, there was definitely differences of opinion about step down facilities from the hospital. And so I think at one point I had clarified that rather than having step downs like subsequent to the hospital, what I was envisioning was, particularly if the legislation moved toward creating a new building, a new structure, a new environment, a new campus or whatever, take advantage of that to modify what is now the enhanced security portion of the hospital, so the Dutcher building, into something that does more modify a seamless transition to the community. So it's still essentially a technical hospital setting, but it's not a hospital ward unit. Like, wouldn't that be a better place for people to be while still in the hospital environment, but yet in these settings that more mirrored community living? So that it wasn't like an additional step after the hospital, it was transforming the existing domains into these types of settings so that people could have this, more of a transition into the community. And when they're ready to leave the hospital, leave the hospital. And I believe I had authored or modified something that I think Mike had originally written about the physical plant that I'm pretty sure was circulated to everybody. And I guess I thought that was something that we
So
found.
I was actually thinking about Gaylord, where when after a lengthy, after a period of rehabilitation, that they actually have way back in the back there cottages that the people live in. They, people come in to do this, that, and the other thing, but it gives them an idea of what it would be like if they have to go out into the community. And having spent 3.5 years on the streets of Norwich with people coming out of Norwich State, I can tell you that that would be very helpful, especially things like where to cash a check, how to get your food, how to cook, stuff like that.
But
Where to
the-
put your
the-
gas.
these are all things that can and should be done in the community. They should not be on.
Who will do them? Who will
Wait a
do
minute,
them?
wait a minute, let me finish. What you don't, if you put them on an institutional grounds, they're part of the institution and they're not of the community. If somebody doesn't need an institutional level of care, they shouldn't be living on institutional grounds. It's a violation of Olmsted. Olmsted says that if somebody doesn't need institutional care, they have to reside in the community. And there are lots of Medicaid waivers that are available for people to go out into the community and then to relearn how to shop, how to clean, how to cook, how to go to the bank. That
I
can
can't do
all
this.
happen in the community.
And in
I
fact, the community providers already do that.
Right. It's too bad Kim's not here because she would
Yeah.
talk about what she does.
Well, let me just say this. I do believe that this was lifted right out of our discussion. And I do not
Not
back
from
down
what
from the need to do this. Does anybody agree that this is something that is not needed?
Not on the institutional grounds. No, I don't
didn't say
agree.
that. I said this idea of this consideration of modifying, transforming the enhanced security portion of the hospital came right out of the minutes, but let us forget that part and let us go to the meat of what's going on here. That we need something that affords a more seamless transition to the community. Let's start there. Do we all agree that that's needed?
It depends upon what you mean. I
Wait.
I can't answer that question. In a
Really?
vacuum.
Really?
Well,
Really?
Linda,
Just talked about
because
it. You can't-
there's more than one way to have a seamless transition.
That's right.
And so this is one way, but that's not necessarily the way. And so if you're willing to put the language in there that these cottages should be in the community and not on institutional ground, then
Right.
that's different.
Right.
Say that.
I guess-
Let us, okay. Yes,
I just
Dr. Hauser.
respond to that. Yeah. So, I mean, I think that's important too. I guess the thought I was having was, wouldn't it, like, for those who do still need to be in the hospital, wouldn't it be nice and wouldn't it be better, rather than living on a hallway on the 3rd floor of the Dutcher building, to live in more of a transitional setting where people can have more autonomy in doing certain things, but yet still have the benefit of being in the hospital if they need to be there. So I'm talking about the people who still need to be hospitalized. And I'm talking about people when they're ready to go into the community. I'm saying,
Yeah,
wouldn't it be nicer
this
to
is like the
transform the
last-
hospital setting? The hospital setting doesn't have to be 2 buildings. It can be something different. We can make it that way.
Dr.
And don't
Rodas.
call it a cottage
Rodas
or
is
an
an-
apartment.
Wait a minute, Nancy. Dr. Rodas
First
has
of
been
all-
waiting.
We're not, guys, we're not building anything here today, right? We're making recommendations. I just want to be sensitive to the language. We are talking about consideration to modify, first of all, consideration. We're not even talking about anything. Then we add, this may involve, okay? So we're not really, I mean, I would hope, frankly, that the architects and the experts and all the stakeholders get together, including patients and former patients. When you design, just like when I designed the last hospital I was at, we get all the input from everyone, including people like Dr. Hauser. And so I'm thinking, if I'm there because, I burnt my house down with my parents and I've been there 15 years, staying in an apartment type situation for the month prior to going out to the community, I'm pretty sure nobody's violating my rights or the Olmstead Act in that. I think that would be a pretty good transition, as opposed to the cooking class we saw, where they show you how to not burn the house down. It's a different thing to show you in a class with everybody, as opposed to living by myself for a month and seeing how it works in a still safe setting. So I think that's what Lori's intention was. I think it's fine myself. I do understand though the comments. You don't want to see this as an extension of the stay, or now let's put them over there for another 5 years. I don't think that was the intention of this language for sure. I think it's just talking about something between, here and there. As particularly since there is an absence right now of a great community setting for them. It would be nice to say, and look, this person's been a month in this little kind of semi-independent situation, but they have their own apartment, they've been able to cook for themselves, clean for themselves, blah, 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 bathe, and all the activities of daily living. I think it would help them on the back end too. So I'm fine with this particular language. I think we did discuss this. I get it. If I were building a brand new place and I have space and money to create an environment like this, it makes sense to me. We're not telling them to do it. All we're saying is these are things they should take into consideration.
I just feel I would much rather have them invest in community than investing on elongating the institution.
Right.
You know, and dollar for dollar, we're going to save the taxpayers money by having it in the community and do it. You know, it's like you can learn to swim in a pool, or you can learn to swim on YouTube. I would much rather swim in the pool.
I am not opposed to removing the sentence about the consideration of modifying / transforming the enhanced security portion of the hospital. I would say the creation, rather than all that, of a system that affords us more seamless transition to the community. I'm not wedded to having it on the grounds. It might be the consideration, because what we're talking about is, you know, the consideration of a new maximum security facility. So if we take out that part about, and I will, I'm not, I know somebody out there said this, not me. I think that Mike is right. We got to say what we think is the best way forward. And I do believe, and I have a lot of personal examples and personal experience with people living in the community and having a tough time. And sometimes they are readmitted, not because it was just a little bit too much for them. So having this opportunity for giving them a chance to see what it's like to have your own place, because maybe they never had one, have it so that there's someone there to help them. I'm not talking about, you know, having 4 staff around the clock, and I think we were thinking in the future as to what should be planned in the future if they follow along a new security, a new facility. Yes, Dr. Bodas.
I'm sorry. I think perhaps the word cottages seem to be a little bit of a lightning rod. And I think, and let's be honest, first of all, that would be the most expensive solution anywhere. Nobody's going to build a whole bunch of cottages anywhere. If they do build them, it should be out in the community, by the way. But it's cost prohibitive as opposed to a apartment style wing, we'll call it, which I think is what Lori actually had envisioned. And I don't know if there'd be a lot of pushback if we took out the word cottages. I wonder what you guys think about that. Again, I still think this sentence, the whole bullet, I actually, again, I thought it was important because it once again emphasized in a backdoor way, the ultimate goal is getting to the community, right? I do agree 100% what Paul said, though, and I think we kind of say it, but I think we even say it more explicitly that, you know, we say it explicitly, but maybe emphasize it, I guess, a better way to say it, about committing resources and dollars to the community to accommodate.
So we actually have a whole part in the
Yeah.
later on in this.
Yeah, that's why I said we did. I think we do it, but I think it's just another segue. Man.
So the thing with the word cottages, though, are they are actual places on the CVH campus now.
Right.
Are they?
And so that's why that's kind of
Yeah,
a charged thing.
Oh.
It's not cottages in the community. It's cottages currently existing
Right.
on the campus now.
I would take that word out.
Yeah, well, what John said, that's that's exactly what I meant. Like modifying units so that afford people more independence, so they're able to demonstrate that they can do that. Because I think that'll get people out quicker if they're able to do that. It's hard to demonstrate that level of independence when everything is provided for you, you know, by the institution, by the staff. So I think it would actually help get people out
I'm getting
and
lost.
make them
Paul?
feel more confident in being out.
Well, and to Linda's point earlier, I think a lot of the reason that the people end up going back in the hospital is we don't provide them with the supports that they need out in the community in the first place.
It is.
So I don't think it's that they didn't get to practice independent living. I think that we didn't give them the supports in the first place.
And let's also remember, particularly at CVH, where we don't have the PSRB on our back, if people are not dangerous to self or others or gravely disabled, they shouldn't be there in the first place. They should be in the community. And there is discussion later on, as Linda said, about services in the community and that it shouldn't take people forever once they're discharge ready. But I think we have to be really careful when we talk about the idea of keeping people who are close to being ready to discharge in these nice little settings. They shouldn't be in the hospital if they don't meet the standard of commitment.
Right. And you shouldn't have to prove your readiness to the community.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
the interesting part was a friend of ours went into rehab and took some medications, and they ended up at a step down ICU unit. And the ICU unit came around 2 days after, the person was out of consciousness for like 2 days. And then when they gained consciousness, they walked for 5 minutes with a walker and they said, okay, he's discharge ready. And they discharged him at like 9:30 at night. And so the thing with that was he couldn't walk without a walker. He walked into the rehab, but he couldn't walk after. And it's like, so that test of this, you have to prove that you can do this in order to move forward is kind of counter to the recovery movement and kind of counter to therapeutic.
And it's not the standard of probate court. Discharge ready is not a standard in the court. You cannot commit somebody if you think that they don't know how to cook and they're not ready to live in their own apartment.
I'm not talking about proving anything. What I'm talking about is that you are empowering the patient to be able to function successfully in the community. And you put your finger on it, Paul. I have seen people who didn't know how to take their medicines and took the wrong medicines, or they went to the pharmacist, or they did something else in the community, and they ended up back in prison because they were mentally compromised. And it was that they had no idea of what was going to happen. What's wrong with preparing them wherever so that they will be successful?
Because you have no legal authority to hold them at that point.
But I think Lori's point.
Wait a minute, Dr. Rock.
I'm sorry.
They are sent for treatment.
Right.
They are sent for treatment, and this would be part of the treatment. And that would be the kind of gold standard maybe, but the standard that you are now ready to go in the community. It's not that they are being held so they can prove some sort of, it's that you want them, one, be successful. You don't want to see them again because it's terrible when they are not successful. The second part is, if this is part of the treatment, then it's part of the treatment. And the courts, you're not discharged until we know you're going to be able to successfully function in the community.
But that's not the standard. That's not the standard the court uses.
It is the standard form for the healthcare perception.
I don't care. It's the standard that the court standard is whether you are dangerous to self or others or gravely disabled. The courts can't use the kind of standard you're talking about, Lynn. The probate court can't. We're talking about CVH because they cannot hold somebody under the standard that you're proposing. You can't do that. It's simply against the law.
Well, wait a minute. The standard that we're using, if it was just that they could serve their time, why are they in a hospital?
Well, serving their time has nothing to do with CVH and has absolutely nothing to do.
Why are they there? Why don't we just put them in prison? You're using the law.
So you asked why
you're
they're
using
there.
it. You're losing it because you've lost a standard that if they're going to go through all of this, you just don't want to have somebody. You want to be able to enhance their capacity, their success as they go back, because
but
It's not like probation.
you also want to give them the opportunity to fail. And if you don't want them to fail, then you don't want them to succeed, because you're going to end up putting them in bubble wrap and putting them in a box to keep them safe. And so I want to push back, because the reason why they're there is because out of a plea agreement, right, out of an affirmative plea agreement, and I'm not a lawyer, so Nancy, you might have to come in with the legal stuff on this, but the state entered an agreement that the person committed a crime and they were mentally deficient at the time of that crime, that they didn't have the mental capacity at that time to be charged based on a Supreme Court decision. And so the state in turn turns around and says, we understand that you weren't well, and we're offering you treatment instead of punishment. Right? Treatment instead of punishment.
And I just weigh in on that, because it's not exactly accurate. To get a not guilty by reason of insanity decision in a criminal court, it's not a guilty plea, or it's not a plea of any type at all. It's actually someone is presenting it as a defense in a prosecution, and you have to go through the entire process with where a judge ultimately will decide whether or not you meet the criteria of not guilty by reason of insanity. But this is definitely, maybe a lot of things, but it's not a plea bargain. And I just wanted to clarify, it's right, not a deal. It's you can only get this if you can convince a judge that you meet the criteria of not guilty. And don't forget, if you don't meet those criteria, you're guilty of the crime. I mean,
right.
That's a high stakes enterprise.
But the thing with that is the state is saying, Mike, that we will provide you treatment instead of punishment.
Not the prosecutors. The prosecutors are saying you are responsible for this crime, and we're going to present evidence so that a judge can decide whether or not you meet the criteria of not guilty by reason of insanity. I mean, it's the state's not agreeing, meaning the prosecutors are not agreeing to it. It's an adversarial hearing where the judge has to decide. It's what I'm saying is, like, this is not a deal you make. This is something.
No, I'm not saying it's a deal. I'm not saying it's a deal that you make. I'm saying what happens when they reach that decision of NGRI is that the person is given treatment instead of punishment.
Correct. Yeah.
And so what happens though is, and I think it goes to the culture, is we aren't looking at it as the treatment that the judge decided that the person should have instead of punishment. We're looking at it as treatment along with punishment.
Yeah, well, I mean, the only role the judge plays is to commit the individual to the custody of the PSRB. I mean, and for some period of time, you saw this in this case the other day, where the guy got 120 years commitment.
Yeah.
And then at that point, it's basically turned over to other, just like when you send the guy to prison, the court's ending its role in this case. You're committed to the custody of the Commissioner of Corrections. So it's a similar thing.
And of course, sometimes people are better off getting being found guilty, because they're going to do much less time.
Yeah, and it's worth noting that, we're talking about housing and where people are going to receive treatment. There's way more seriously mentally ill people in the custody right now of the Department of Correction than are in the custody of the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services. I mean, just like right now at Garner, which is just the men, there's 450 people incarcerated at Garner, the vast majority of whom are seriously mentally ill. So, I mean, that's as a practical matter, that's the alternative to what we're talking about. And it's very easy to put people in that system if people don't have confidence in this system. And that's just the reality.
Okay, Dr. Rodas and then Dr. Hauser.
I just want to comment that we're almost an hour in and we've gotten to one recommendation. If we could, I'll vote to take this entire section out if we can move to another recommendation, to be honest with you. But I think we're getting bogged down in, what the law states and what the judge is saying. And I just feel like we're getting stuck in the mud here.
You raise a point. We're just making a recommendation to the General Assembly. We're not deciding that the law, what the law decides, it's something, a recommendation, and we are not here to debate the law.
But not all of us agree with this recommendation.
All right, we will, hold on. All right, Dr. Rodas, are you finished?
Well, the only thing I want to just emphasize, and let Lori do it herself, but the last point, look, so if I was okay, I broke my hip, you guys know that, I was in a hospital. I'm pretty sure there's no law that said someone had to show that I could walk up and down a flight of stairs and walk before I went home, right? But they made sure I could walk up and down a flight of stairs and then I could walk before I went home. And that gave me confidence that when I went home. Now imagine if I'm incarcerated or hospitalized, whatever we want to call whiting, for 15 years for whatever thing I committed, even though I wasn't mentally competent at the time to judge my actions. I'm thinking it'd be really tough for me to go out from that environment to out into the community. I understand the community things are supervised type environment. It's not like we're sending you out and go get your own apartment. I just think if I had a little bit of time in an apartment type setting where I had to wake myself up and get to my job on the campus, so I had a job on the campus and back home and could clean. And I just think that would instill some confidence in me and enhance my ability to be successful on the outside. And I think that was an important point Laurie made, and I just don't want to lose it.
Right. Well, and the thing
Excuse
though,
me, Paul,
oh.
Dr. Hauser is next, then you.
Well, I mean, to John's point, I'll yield back most of my time so that we can move forward. But I do just want to comment on one thing, Paul, that you said, because you said something similar a couple meetings back, and I didn't comment on it then, this idea of treatment and punishment. And I think that's sort of a broad generalization, and it may be a little bit of a supposition on the part of people that work at the hospital to assume that that's kind of their mindset. Our responsibility is to treat a person's mental illness until, per statute, their conditional release to the community, meaning their release to the community, would not pose a danger to themselves or others. And that's what we've all signed on to do. So I can't speak for everybody, certainly. I can absolutely speak for myself, but I do think it's a little bit of a generalization to assume that others, or that a broad sense of people that work there have that mindset.
But this is something that you've said yourself. When I've brought it up before, you've come back with, yeah, but they did something.
They did something that needs to be addressed through treatment, not punishment.
But when I've raised the question of treatment, that they're supposed to be there for treatment, and that the treatment is supposed to be the deciding factor of whether or not they move forward, you come back with, yeah, but they did something.
Saying is, they are not responsible criminally for what they did, but we can't ignore the act. We can't ignore the significant act of violence that resulted. We have to treat the illness so that that significant act of violence doesn't happen again. That doesn't mean we're punishing that act of violence. That means we're treating it to make sure that the circumstances that led to that don't recur. That's very different than throwing somebody in a cell for 20 years as punishment for having committed that same act. I'm saying the NGRI doesn't erase the fact the act happened, and we need to treat it so that it doesn't happen again. But I do want to.
I would like to suggest we cannot throw if you look at the bullet above, creation of a patient experience that is a continuum of care flowing from an individualized care plan that engages the patient as an active participant, includes adequate preparation to be safe and successful in returning to the community, period. This, and then going to the next bullet, this may involve, I would take out the cottages because I didn't know they actually had them there, I'm sorry. Yeah. But to go on with the idea that we are giving them an opportunity to learn and independent living skills in a safe and secure environment. Does anybody have a problem with that?
Yeah, Because if they're ready
All
for
right.
that, they don't need to be hospitalized.
All right,
They can do
let
that
us,
in the
let us take a vote
community.
on this. Let us take a vote on this, because I'm sure that everybody would like to know why you are so set against this. Do you think that when they walk out of Whiting or CVH now that they're ready to resume living?
Nancy or Linda, they've been doing it since 1985. They've been successfully transitioning out of Whiting and Dutcher since 1985. So you're looking
And there were no
at
problems since 1985?
oh, there's always outliers in this, but a lot of people have successfully transitioned out of Dutcher into the community since 1985. So you're looking at what, over 35 years?
And what it means
Yes, but
is
what kind of
spending the money on
system did they have in
enhancing.
place?
It means enhancing the money that is spent in the community. As John said, he knows people aren't just discharged and sent to an apartment and being told good luck, but it's robust community services. We want to see the money being spent on robust community services and not more money in institutions.
So do you have those robust systems in place now?
That's why we don't want more money going to the institution. We want more money going to the community. And if we accept your recommendation, there's going to be more money going to the institution, which is going to siphon more money away from the community.
I respectfully disagree with you because
Linda,
this.
Linda, can I offer a suggestion maybe that would help move us along? Could we maybe, like we did with the patient searches and the PSRB, if folks feel real strongly about this last bullet point, could we maybe put a simple dissenting opinion right after it that says some of the members disagree with this last
I agree
because X, Y, or Z.
I agree with that.
And that way, both ideas are put in there, and it can still and expressed, and the legislature can decide which they agree with.
I agree. That's perfectly okay with me, Dr. Rodas.
Yeah, I'm actually fine with that, but I would also, I think I'm fine with that actually, but I would also state in that somewhere in there that emphasize the point that Nancy just made, which is if it's a zero-sum game, if it's a zero-sum game and they say, well, we got an extra $1 million that we could spend for apartments on the campus or $1 million spent in the community, I think we all agree that we'd rather spend $1 million in the community. So I think it's an important to emphasize that this idea we have, this gentle suggestion we're making, which isn't even a recommendation, actually, it's a gentle thing you might consider, should not preclude from or should not prevent us from making the important investments that need to be made in the community. Because for that one thing, we all agree.
Has it occurred to anyone that this report may result in no changes whatsoever?
Yeah, and that would be the shame on the state.
Absolutely. So
that doesn't mean we should.
That is definitely. I mean, we have looked at decades of suggestions on what should be done. So when you talk about where you're putting your money, we have no power to make that happen. We can only do the very best job we have to outline what it is that we think should be done. Did you make a motion, Dr. Hauser?
Would you like me to?
Well, let's see if it has a second.
Okay, I move that whoever disagrees with this last bullet can write a dissenting opinion explaining those views.
Is there a second to that?
Wait,
I would like to make the motion that we
Wait a
adopt
minute, you're out of order. You're out of order, Paul. A motion is on the floor.
he can offer a friendly amendment.
No,
Yeah,
it hasn't even been seconded, so he can't do that.
Yeah.
Is there a second? Dr. Rodas seconds it. All right, Paul, what did you want to say?
I would like to make the friendly recommendation that the current language adopts Dr. Rodis's idea of stating that we think that we should prioritize community spending over institutional spending.
I don't
With-
think that's a friendly amendment.
Well,
I
it's up
think
to
that's a
Lori
whole
to
nother
say
thing
whether
that
it's
you
a
can
friendly-
write in your dissenting opinion, whatever
It's
you want to
up-
say.
It's up to
But I don't
Lori
think
whether
that-
it's a friendly amendment, not you.
It's
Lori
not a
made the
friend-
motion. That's not up to you. It's up to Lori whether it's a friendly amendment.
I'm fine with it.
So it's a friendly amendment. I'll second it.
I just have a clarification question. My understanding of what we were doing today is reviewing this draft, and that between now and the next time we meet, we are going to sort of redline it in effect, and then come back to make final decisions. And what we're considering now, in my opinion, is more like a final decision kind of issue, as opposed to how we're all reacting and whether or not there's consensus around this stuff at the moment. So my thought is this might actually be premature. I mean, it's good that it's been expressed because this is kind of like a consensus thing, but I got the impression today we would just be kind of getting a sense of the extent to which there is consensus around each of these individual things, and then going into the actual details at a subsequent meeting. That was my sense.
Was that the motion to table?
It doesn't really matter to me whether, I think that we found consensus here, but I just wanted to maybe,
I
Diffuse
don't
the
think we
chances
have
of
found. I don't think we have found.
I got the impression that Lori indicated that this was in effect a friendly amendment. Seems fine to me. It doesn't seem like it undermines the intent of what was stated in there. I'm just trying to get to the point of like, I don't think we need to vote yes or no on specific things. I think this is just to see, gauge, is there or is there not consensus? And if there's not, is it just a wordsmithing kind of problem, or is it really a fundamental problem? And only because we've got all these other sections to take a quick look at today. That's why I'm raising this issue now.
So, Dr. Hauser, do you want to withdraw your?
How that works? Yes, that's fine.
After all
That's
that,
fine. I just,
Would you like to
I'll-
withdraw your
guess
motion?
I'll withdraw the motion. I'll leave it out
Because there
there on the
was-
table.
And Dr. Rodas, would you like to withdraw your second? All right.
I'll leave it on the table as a friendly suggestion of how we can maybe come to a resolution around this if people feel strongly on both sides.
Okay.
I'm trying to tackle the next one.
Well, the page 4 are the recommendations for the competency restoration.
I'm fine with it as it is. I have an idea about maybe adding one thing to it. And that is, and you know, I've raised this before. I think the one thing that's missing here, in my opinion, is recommending that the decision makers in this part of the process, the court-based decision makers, meaning the judge, the prosecutor, the defense attorney, probably would benefit from some, I guess you'd call it training on what's really involved in the decisions they're making all the time in court. I really am convinced that most of the people making these decisions don't appropriately appreciate the consequences of even referring somebody for a competency evaluation. And so I think that would be good. And I think it would be great, and I know I raised this before, if someone could crunch the data and try to identify the courts where there seems to be a disproportionate number of competency restoration orders being handed down, because I do think this is a cultural and when I say just the culture of a courthouse, I do think some places are way more likely to do it. And this sort of first of all, it triggers an extended stay in the Department of Correction, right? Because they're going to be there until it's completed. And then it probably results in more people that are necessary being sent to Whiting at the end of the day. So those are two things I think would be diplomatic to suggest. And you know, we don't have to get into the exact type of training or how much it would cost or who should get, you know, I mean, but I do think those, and that's based on my discussions with a lot of people in the system. I really think they don't appreciate, they don't really understand what's what's involved in this stuff.
Okay, Dr. Hauser is next.
Yeah, well, I'll respond because I think I drafted the majority of this section. So I guess I'll say that the good news is those things are already happening. We already did, Barbara Richer and I already did a training for defense attorneys. We're talks with Dr. Norco and others around doing a similar thing, sort of like a training slash discussion, kind of come to the table so we all understand each other with judges and prosecutors. So that's already in the works to try to understand some of the exact things that you're talking about. And I do know that there's also data being collected around some of the things that you're describing, like where the pressure points are, the different agencies, different jurisdictions that do different things. There's a pilot program that's either being started or started already or just about to launch in Bridgeport for an enhanced respite program as a mechanism of referring people that otherwise would be referred for competency into this more of a jail diversion type of setting. So those things are a number of those things are in place or in progress. And I alluded to some of that in what I wrote here, like, cross-agency training and feedback would help, gathering information and data and whatnot. I could certainly make more specifics, or when we wordsmith and redline, you can
I think it just helps to say there should be more of it, right? And I think
So without objection, Mike, would you like to write something to put in that portion that
yeah, sure.
really talks about what you're thinking?
I'm
No
very
one
simple.
object?
I would just, as I said, I think it'd be good to sort of make that point that there's not enough awareness. It's not a criticism, right? It's a pretty niche topic, it's a little outside the normal criminal justice stuff. And I just think at the end of the day, the deciders are not health professionals. The deciders are lawyers who work in courthouses, and a lot
So
of them.
if you could synthesize that and put it in this, it would be helpful.
Yep, I will do that.
Everybody agrees, right? Okay. All right. Going right along to the patient care and programs.
No, we're not done. Paul and I have our hands up.
I thought that was just like, all right, go ahead. Paul, Nancy, who wants to go first?
Paul, he was
Ah.
first.
I was just wondering, Mike, can you put some language in there that this should be monitored on a fairly regular basis so that we can identify pressure points in the system?
Yeah.
And possibly get more training out there or more supports out there so that we can divert more people from competent restoration.
Yes.
Okay, Nancy?
So what I'm saying may end up being wordsmithing, and if in fact that's all it is, then I can, we can stop talking about it and I'll do it when I send out some edits. But I think there was some stuff in here that unfortunately, because I'm a lawyer, seemed to me to be very vague. So it's hard to know what I guess Lori was talking about. So in the first paragraph, in the middle, it says only to have their cases disposed of through some type of mental health treatment mandate. That's really vague. The only mental health treatment mandates that we have are through probate court or NGRI, and then the competency stuff. So I think that's really too vague.
Well, but can I just answer that one? My take on this is, if you're deemed competent, then you're back in the criminal court, and the prosecutors and it's going to have nothing to do with mental health assessments. It's going to be what they want to do, and they can mandate you to do anything as a condition of probation, for example. So
but that's not a mental health treatment if they're mandating you to do something as a term of probation, because Connecticut doesn't have forced outpatient treatment.
No, but they can.
No, but they can mandate it as a condition of probation.
They can
probation, you can compel them to do anything, and if they refuse, you can be incarcerated.
Right. So we've gotten plenty of people who come to us on a violation of probation specifically because they refuse to or failed to or declined to follow through with mental health evaluation, treatment, substance treatment, stuff like that.
All the time.
So that stuff gets put in as conditions of probation. That's what I meant by mental health, what I
And
mandate.
maybe we should be more specific about that then.
Okay.
That's
Oh, would
fine.
you like to write that up, Nancy?
I can just
You
add like,
could add
you know,
it. It's all right.
probation or something like that.
What? I'm
Yeah.
sorry, Mike.
Okay. Then,
I'm just saying, I
Wait a
think,
minute, wait a minute, wait a minute.
okay,
I'm only saying, restating that I think that's what Lori intended. And I was adding my own experience with the system to indicate that they can pretty much, because don't forget, it's a form of consent. If you agree to ask for probation, you're agreeing to whatever conditions they impose on you. And, you know, almost all of those are actual plea deals where you're going to be asked in court, do you understand what you're going to be required to do? Do you agree to do this? That you understand that the, you know, your failure to do it could result in your reincarceration. I mean, so it's, this kind of thing is happening all the time.
that's fine. That's fine. But I just wanted it to be more stated more artfully so that it's clearer what she was talking about. Because then in the recommendation section, again, where it says expand opportunities for jail diversion at multiple points along the criminal justice process, which is great. But then reserving competency referrals for those cases where jail diversion is not desirable. So I'm not quite sure what not desirable means. Lori, did you have something more specific you could put there? Because that's not standard anywhere.
I think actually that was the motion.
Well, no,
That was
I mean, I can certainly explain what I mean by that.
Yeah.
Somebody who is charged with a crime of murder or assault in the first degree or arson, or, I mean, you know, you can go, everybody has a different, you know, kind of place on that continuum where they think jail diversion might be appropriate or not. But generally speaking, when people are charged with felonies, multiple at that, court
Can we
doesn't look to
say
jail
that?
diversion as an option. So
That's what I was sort of saying. So
not
then,
desirable in the prosecutor's eyes, I guess I should, you know.
or felonies, if we want to use the word felony and
I
Here-
don't want to, I
No.
don't want to articulate what the criminal justice system should consider desirable or not for jail diversion. That's their call. Right. I'm saying there are going to be cases that are not going to be referred for jail diversion because the court thinks that's not appropriate, that they need to go through the criminal justice process. That's their call to make.
all right, then if you could just put it that way, that
Yeah,
makes it
yeah.
clearer.
Yeah, just maybe switch out appropriate for desirable. It might make it more.
Maybe. Okay. And then, that last long paragraph, where it goes, consequently, we recommend that it be revitalized to meet more regularly, more formally, and in more public and inviting format. I'm not quite sure what inviting means. Does that mean coffee and pastries?
Of course.
um,
I guess I meant like in inviting additional like people to join, like maybe people who aren't part of the core group, but like who do the work, you know. So if the topic for the day is competency, or if the topic for the day is jail diversion, to bring in the jail diversion people that do that, to bring in the people from Whiting that do competency, so that the people that are on the ground doing the work are coming to these meetings to be able to talk about this is what happens, this is the realities of the situation.
all right, so if you could make that more succinct, but
Yeah.
yeah, thanks.
I had, so if I could, I
Like-
actually, that kind of stood out, that sentence stood out to me too. I actually agree with Nancy. And so what I thought was, first of all, I wouldn't say more public because that seems like public's public, right? So I would just say in a public and perhaps open in format or something to that sense as opposed to the, because yeah, that struck me funny, inviting, what do they mean? So I think Nancy's got a point there, but that would solve it, I think, just in a public and open format.
Yeah, that's good.
Or inclusive format. Inclusive
Inclusive, yeah.
goes better to what you were saying, Lori, right? You
Yeah.
want people to come in and give their input.
And then the next sentence, this group would share data, blah, 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 which policies and practices are having a meaningful desired impact and which need to be amended or discarded. So I guess my question was by whose standards, but I guess it's the standards of the committee. So
Well,
that what was it?
ultimately, you know, if we're talking about statutory, I guess maybe policies isn't the right. If we're talking about statutory stuff, obviously it's going to be at the discretion of the legislature, which means that a lot of people have to come to the table and agree on things for things to fly. I mean, we've run into challenges in the past trying to make changes that we think would be advisable, because we can't get all the players to agree, like people have different perspectives, understandably so. So that's some of the challenge, but
Because I think you're going to have the same problem there that we have here, because people are from, all kinds of different constituencies. So just as, we don't agree particularly on meaningful desired impact. I'm not sure how this group is going to agree on what's meaningful desired impact. So I'm not quite sure. I'm not at all sure how to amend that, but I just found it, again, vague, and I'm not sure how to work with that.
I guess what I envision is, as people from these different parts of the system with different perspectives, the same way that we're doing, that we are able to come to some consensus around a lot of to a consensus around a lot of things. There's always going to be kind of different things that we don't always agree on, but I think the more that these agencies talk with one another and identify, like, here are the problems with this practice and here's how we can modify it and change it to address everybody's needs to the extent possible. So I guess that's why it's a little bit vague, because the whole thing is, that whole kind of concept is vague. It has to be some sort of consensus among everybody involved.
And then impact on whom? Impact on the patients? Impact, who's impact again? Impact on whom?
From the criminal justice perspective, it's going to be more than just patients, right? It's going to be patients, defendants, victims, society at large. There are multiple players and there are multiple perspectives that have to be considered. You can't just come at it from one perspective. So I guess that's why there's not like a single entity that's identified there.
So I'm just wondering if maybe there's a way of saying that so it's clearer, because what you're talking about, is that possible?
Well, actually, I think we lifted that kind of out of the verbatim of our discussions.
Well, it can always be improved. Obviously,
Or we could just
everybody's
take
going
it
to kind of
out.
provide
Let's
their
just take it out.
Yeah, I'm
No,
not
Take out
well, I don't want to
desired
take it
impact.
out. Everybody's going to provide their sort of red line suggestions. Maybe someone will think of some better way of characterizing it. But
Okay.
I'll try.
Thank you.
Any more on this particular, on page 4, recommendations? We're coming up on the 3 o'clock, but the patient care and programs, the recommendations on page 5.
Which is, wait, it's not paginated, so I have to count. 1,
Yeah,
2,
it's all
3, 4. So 5 and 6 you're talking about?
no, I'm talking about page 5.
Oh, page 5.
It starts with recommendations.
Linda, depending how you printed it, it either came out unnumbered or numbered. So I printed it the second time and it came out numbered. Even though it's numbered on the document, it's funny. I don't know. So Nancy must have the same problem, only number page 1. But if you,
Well, it's the one that has the header
it prints right.
staff development training.
Right.
I'm really sorry, but I don't have a secretary, so
No, it's fine. It worked right the second time. So it's page staff development. That's page 5. Nancy, if you're counting the pages.
Yeah.
So we're talking about,
I'm looking on the one I have on my computer as opposed to the one I printed.
Yeah, it's a staff development, training, findings, the task
so the
force.
recommendations are above it that we're going to talk about. That was the rest.
We're doing the patient care, right?
Right. Right.
So I think the patient care and programs, we talk about patient care, that's the perfect place to talk, and I can do this when I do some editing, to talk about recovery oriented care and programs. That's exactly where you need.
Agree.
That's
That's
good. Yep.
I agree.
Agree.
And Nancy, I would say that I think that we were going to look to you to sort of beef up this section, because we tried to draw on, some of the data that we had from discussions and from the testimonials of patients and things like that, but it certainly can be
It needs a little bit more meat on the bones. It looks, in relation to everything else, we need to say a little bit more about that if anybody wants to.
I'm glad you guys put in competitive wages.
Well, I think that's something that Paul said.
Well, you did
And it
actually.
rings a
Well, the
bell.
three of you guys, it was from that spreadsheet that one of your recommendations. So
Right,
I
right.
agree.
Okay, so then we have staff development and training. And the recommendations.
Let's start with the first sentence and findings, which I don't agree with.
Well, that's wordsmithing. So, and
No, it's not. I'm not in agreement with it.
I think it's tone and tenor.
you don't think that licensed clinical professions do not need training and to avoid behaviors that are abusive, demeaning, or malicious?
I would hope that anyone wouldn't need training not to torture someone, but apparently some people do.
Mhm.
And so
And that's your opinion.
right, but the thing with that is this is saying that people don't need training around that, and I think that they do.
Right, exactly.
Well, I think it says that they shouldn't need training. And then he
Yeah,
goes on to say,
They should
however,
not need training, but we go
you
on
know,
to talk
we
about what they
believe that
need.
ongoing training is important and can help avoid these kinds of things in the future. So, I mean, again, we're not wedded to that, but it's meant to kind of set the stage that this shouldn't be something that's necessary, but we think it's something that would be helpful in preventing.
We're just going to
Well,
talk about, in order to, wait a minute, excuse me. Do you want to put something in the red line? Go ahead and do that. We're talking about the recommendation to get some consensus on this, so we will be able to finally move. So you do whatever you want to about what you don't agree in the findings, but we agreed we were going to talk about the recommendations, and if there was consensus, then we'll move on. The recommendations that there be ongoing, both on hiring and regular intervals. Just take a look at it and see the recommendations, okay?
I think that the recommendation should start off with that, and you talked about it earlier, but it wasn't included in the recommendations, that the training should be in person and not people sitting at their cubicles or desks online.
Yeah, we did put that in there.
I don't think it's here.
Well, we talked about,
Oh, no, that was an oversight then, because it might have been in a previous draft, but it's supposed to be in there.
It was in a different section, but not-
Definitely should be in person and not in front of a computer.
Okay.
I will second that.
Thank you.
all right, so we're going to put that right there as we start out with the itemization.
On the next bullet, or the bullet point that says cover content applicable to the section, I think there should be more than a basic understanding of serious mental illness and personality dynamics. This is a psychiatric hospital. If anybody needs more than a basic understanding, it's folks there.
We can just take out that word.
Yeah, just take out basic.
It's easy.
Well, I think we're talking about everybody. You know, all of the staff.
That's an easy word to
That-
take out. I think that's.
I know it is, but I just want to explain what we were thinking. There are some people that come to work there that are in different situations that don't have a basic understanding. Okay? And I think the one that I really wanted to say is that the idea of the teachable moments, using the things that actually go on at the facility and how to deal with it, so that people can get a sense of what is should do and not have to wing their way through it. And also, one of the things I wanted to, and I did add this, that in some settings, the final thing there, that the training and education opportunities can contribute to the potential for, if you attend these trainings, if you do well with these trainings, this is something that could be factored into your both your reviews, your ratings, or whatever, but also building on it so that perhaps even with the supportive staff and the more education, more continuing education you had, the better your possibility for being promoted would be. Okay. Any more discussion on this one? All right, going on
Can
to.
we just take out the all clinical? I mean, I know we want to focus on the clinical, but I think it should be all persons working in there should have ongoing training. Because you know, as we saw in the reports, right, your frontline people are the MHAs, and they aren't necessarily deemed a clinical person.
Really?
Where's that, Paul?
When we're talking,
No, where in the document you're talking
He's talking
about?
about that first, I think he's talking about the first sentence, the task force and agreement licensed clinical professionals. I think the point being that it should be everybody, the security guards,
the police, the cooks, right.
I agree.
The
I think
cleaning
that
crew,
sentence,
that they should all.
yeah, maybe we can edit that to just something to the effect of,
Say
while
again
the
where it
task force
is.
agreement that Whiting staff should not need, or the staff should not need training. We do believe ongoing staff development is key, and that kind of solves the problem. And I wouldn't get too specific on who. Everybody, I agree. Everybody there needs the training, because there's,
right.
you know, one of the arguments we made. It's almost not. It was a culture that allowed this. Remember, so culture. I don't want to use the word conspiracy, but a culture means this behavior was allowed, which meant a lot of different people, a lot of different levels had to know stuff was going on, right? So everybody probably needs the training.
Right.
Yeah, sorry,
Well,
it wasn't the intention to carve it out as clinical.
Right. Well, because it's like, you know, the two recovery support specialists that work there have to do 60 hours over 3 years in order to keep their certification. The MHAs don't have any training. The nurses don't have any continuing training. And so I think that we need to look, that part does need to be emphasized, but you know, I think everyone should have ongoing training about working in a forensic or inpatient hospital setting.
Point.
Okay. Any other comments on those recommendations? The teachable moments and the mandated the licensed clinical professionals to have continuing education. I think we ran into trouble with that years ago because the state will have to pay for it or provide it. So they're finally, anything else on this portion? Should we just go right into community services? Okay.
How long do we have Beverly? I'm just not recognizing.
Okay.
You can go as long as you want.
Oh, you said that.
Hey, I
Well,
want this over and done with.
I know, but the problem is I have another meeting I'm supposed to be at. So I'm going to have to leave pretty soon. So why don't we go through community services?
Well, I think I sent you out something to kind of stimulate your thoughts on that. The only recommendation that we had was about the master plan. And I wanted to, maybe folks can look at the information I sent out and have some more really like concrete options for the community services for the next meeting. Is that okay? We'll do that. So
Okay.
then if we go to the next page, on page 7, it's about the recommendations to assess the implications of a patient at Whiting Forensic Hospital being permitted to be present during a search of his or her possessions.
So I have a question about that. Why are we going on? I mean, this point got more space than a lot of other points. It's a done deal. The legislature passed the bill. So
I
why
agree.
do we have to discuss it?
Well, we did say that, but we also had Dr. Hauser's dissenting opinion.
And with all due respect to Lori, it doesn't matter. It's a done deal. The legislature
law.
passed the bill. It's done. It's the law. It
think
doesn't
that-
matter whether it's her. I mean, it is
I-
the law.
I mean,
So can I just, the reason we kept it in here was because it was one of our specific charges. And prior to the law passing, we had, drafted this and circulated it and sort of come to this, consensus about the language and then the dissenting opinion. So we just put it in there because it was one of the things that we were asked. We could
and it's in the
take it
minutes.
out and say
It's
that,
in the
this
minutes.
doesn't matter because,
It's a record of what we did.
Yeah, we don't.
but
have-
like Lynn
Well-
said, it's the record of what we did.
It's done.
Yes, but
Max.
it's, since I think, okay, so we have a compromise here, I think. Well, it was one of our charges. I think we should address it briefly, not to this degree, and then make a sentence. However, this has recently been addressed by this case, this legislation number, docket number,
Right,
blah, whatever
PA,
it is. and
whatever.
Move on.
Yeah,
Yeah, we did. We did say that.
I know, but
Yeah,
it's
I'm saying, well, I just
over a
compress
whole
it.
page. It's
And
almost
we
a
don't need, we
page
can
and a half.
compress it, and we don't need, I don't even think, Laura, with all respect, we don't need a dissenting opinion. We could just say, we discussed it, but it's a moot point.
Right,
And that's-
done.
on.
We don't need a
fine
page
with that.
and a half on it.
Okay, do you want to amend the minutes too? It is part of our record, our real record.
Talking about the minutes, none of us, except for you and maybe Mike, have ever seen the minutes.
That's not true.
They don't get, I mean, maybe they're posted on the website, but they don't get circulated among
Well,
us.
just because it's your
Usually-
responsibility, it's your
Usually-
responsibility.
I don't need to
not
be
mine.
told what my responsibility is, Linda. You're not my boss. But they've never been circulated for comment or correction.
They've never been approved.
They've never been approved. There's never been a vote. So I'd like to forget about these minutes. The point is, this is a done deal. It's over with. We don't need a page and a half on it. And let's just move on.
It's not
from-
a page and a half.
Guys, let's move on.
All right. The psychiatric, the role of the PSRB. Are there any discussion of the recommendations?
Oh, just the recommendations. I have a question. I mean, obviously, there's still, I guess it's a minority now about abolishing the PSRB. And so, we may need to write a dissenting report on that. But just specifically, it says section 4C. We recommend that 17A587 be amended to permit patients the opportunity to petition for temporary leave from the hospital. Petition who?
The petition would have to go to the PSRB.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think they don't have the right to do that now. They have to go to court. Isn't that right, Mike?
They don't have the right to petition for temporary leave, period. All they have the right to do is to petition the Superior Court for
Oh,
discharge from the jurisdiction of the PSRB.
Well, see, that gets back to whether this is an adversarial process, as Lori talks about it, and a recovery process, as Paul and I like to think of it. And this should be a clinical determination, we think, not a determination of the PSRB.
They have to go to court now if they want to get a temporary leave.
Right.
No,
No,
right
this is
now,
not a
they
temporary-
don't have, right now, they don't have a recourse to petition for temporary leave from the hospital. They can petition
All right, so
for,
we should say that.
we do.
Oh,
No, but
okay,
this
that's right.
doesn't say temporary leave. This is real, says section 4C says release from the hospital.
So I'm a little unclear about release. Are we talking about release from the hospital, or I want to go to my brother's wedding. I want to leave
Yeah,
for
I
the day.
think that it's temporary.
No,
It's
no.
a temporary leave.
Now,
Temporary leave,
TLs
temporary leave
are
is a very
things.
specific step in the process where people start out typically with a day. It starts out usually with a treatment setting, an outpatient treatment setting, where they go there for like 4 hours or 8 hours, and then it goes from 1 day to 2 days a week, then 3 days a week, and then they go to overnights. And once they get up to 6 overnights in the community, then they're out on what's called conditional release. So it's a specific step in the process. Right now, they don't have the right to petition for it. The only thing they can do is there's mandatory hearings every 2 years to review their
I
case.
got it.
So
I got
at that
No,
at that
I got it.
point, they can, through their attorney, and they can argue if the hospital isn't making a recommendation to move them on to temporary leave, they can argue that they should. So that's where that gets heard.
Got it.
They
But
don't
could
have a
that-
they don't have a
so-
right to petition to hold a
Understood.
hearing the way the hospital does.
So I just want to make sure we don't have unintended consequence though, but then couldn't theoretically then, because now it's on a set timeline that the patient has no recourse but to accept. The alternative is at any time, any patient or every patient could say, I want to petition for leave. Could that not disrupt the entire process as well? So how do you balance that?
Well,
I'm
so-
confused. Disrupt what process?
I mean, inundate the PSRP, but 60 people are saying, I want to leave. I want to petition.
Right,
That's
like
why
if
I think it should be a clinical decision.
every month someone's saying like, I want temporary leave, I want temporary leave, like they couldn't just hold, repeated hearing after hearing. Probably wouldn't benefit the patient either to do that. But so there's not, I mean, right now there's no potential for petition. I would think that if the legislature was going to consider this amendment, they would probably hear from all sides on the issue, and they would have to decide, should there be a specific time frame every year, perhaps like, in probate or
Right.
something like, where it's some reasonable mechanism
Okay,
that the patient can say, I want to argue for my release.
got it. Yeah, after no less than 6 months, some timeline minimum, and you can't do it every 2 weeks. I got it. Thank you.
Anything else?
Well, we haven't resolved this, so.
Well,
What do you mean?
Yeah,
sort
I'd
of-
like
we
to
sort of
come back
did
to
in
this.
the past. This is something that we had talked about, and we agreed that yes, some people think it should be abolished, some people don't. We weren't going to get consensus on that, but we did at least agree on this previous bill that had been proposed, that all of us agreed with almost every element of it. I offered a dissenting opinion about the last point, and we did, I'd circulated this before, and everybody sort of gave it its, the thumbs up as to we can all live and sleep with this one.
So
I'm wondering though, if we make the recommendation that the reviews are more frequent. I mean, we're talking about 35 people up to 200 people. You could easily do 6-month reviews of everybody as opposed to 2 years having to wait.
So they do have 6-month reviews in report. It's the hearings that are held every 2 years, but there are 6-month reviews to the board where the hospital has to make the opinion, if that's their opinion, that they're not making a recommendation for really, you know what I mean? So every 6 months we have to write to the board and say, here's how the person's been progressing in their treatment.
So
And either we're making a recommendation for temporary leave or conditional release or not. And if we're not, we better be able to back that up as to why they're not at that point.
this is adversarial as well, or is this just the hospital making the recommendation and the person doesn't get to comment on it?
The reports to the board are just the reports from the hospital to the board. And if there's not a recommendation for movement, for temporary leave or conditional release or transfer from max, medium, then the report just simply is received by the board and it waits the next 2-year review. Every 2 years, they have to go before the board and have an actual hearing where all points get to be addressed.
So that should be more frequently then.
I'm sorry, but I agree with you, Paul, and I thought we put this in here. I'm looking, but I thought I apologize, I don't have it in here that I can see right now. But you did suggest this 6 months, and I must have missed it.
Well, but there is a review every 6 months. It's just not a hearing.
But what I'm saying is there should be a hearing every 6 months, that it should be adversarial, that the person has the right to provide evidence as to why they think they should be able to move to TLs.
John, you're muted.
Even if the clinicians think the progress hasn't been made, though, I mean, Lori's saying the clinicians do 6-month reviews. I'm not making any progress. You're saying, Paul, I understand that the PSRB should still review my case anyway because 6 months has transpired.
Yeah.
But that seems counterintuitive to what you've always said. Is why is the PSRB making?
Well, yeah, that's the first thing. I mean, to me, I think the PSRB is just a waste of time, and that money could be spent elsewhere, right? Because they don't know more forensically than the treatment team, and they don't know, they don't have that same kind of thing. So personally, I would rather get rid of the PSRB. But if the recommendation includes the part that the PSRB needs to be there, then I think that there needs to be more frequent hearings for people. And we're talking 200 people that are involved. So you could easily do 200 people every 6 months. And
It's a long time for someone stuck in a psychiatric facility. Let's not even talk about 2 years.
Right.
And people have to feel that their progress is that there's some value to their progress. And 2 years is very hard for people to wrap their heads around. So I very strongly.
I'm not wedded to 6 months. I'm okay with 90 days.
Nobody's disagreeing. First of all, I don't think anybody disagrees with what you guys just said about the 6 months, right? We all, I think, agree. I think the whole point of what we're saying here is recommendations that the patient should be able to petition whenever they think they can. And all I'm saying is, rather than us mandating, first of all, I'm not sure I agree that you can do 200 every 6 months, because I actually don't know enough about the process. So I don't want to judge their process. It may be very laborious, a lot of things to review. Again, I just don't want to take the clinicians out of the loop. I think I sound like you now, Paul, but I don't want to take the clinicians out of the loop. The clinicians are saying of the 200 people, we think 40, should be able to now petition instead of waiting for another, let's say, year and a half when they're going to be up for their 2 years. They should be able to petition now.
But those are not separate concepts. There's no reason why you can't have 6-month reviews, but the patient is able to petition as long as there still is a PSRB. But the patient, him or herself or their self, is able to petition themselves for the right to, whether it's temporary release or whatever. Those are not mutually exclusive. That there's always a 6-month review, but within that 6 months, if a patient feels that they want to be able to go to the movies, they can petition to go to the movies. If they feel that they're ready to go out in the community to a supported apartment, they can petition for that.
They should have the right to present their case.
They have to have right, exactly. They have the right to have a voice. Right now, the patient doesn't have a voice.
Guys, isn't that what we're saying here? Aren't we saying that they have right to petition? Am I reading this wrong? We're saying they have right to petition.
I think there's two ideas being put forth here. One is that they should have the right to petition whenever. The other is Paul saying that the mandatory hearings that happen presently every 2 years should perhaps happen every smaller increment, like 6 months.
More frequently.
So,
Yeah.
Right,
I mean,
so
now
6 months or on
that may,
appeal by the,
I mean, I'm not saying we're all agreeing on that, but that may overwhelm the system. That, I think that's something that maybe they need to take into consideration, maybe a different time frame, maybe a year. But another avenue is this for this is to have if the patient has the right to petition, that petition could somehow be reviewed to see if it warrants having a full hearing, right? That would be some other
Like a probable cause determination.
essentially, yeah, that would be some like sort of medium ground, as opposed to just sort of flipping it to, okay, every 2 years, now it's gonna be every 6 months. If the patient has the right to petition to be heard, they could submit a report the same way the hospital does when we want to be heard about a patient's movement. They could submit something through their attorney, and then that could be considered about whether that needs to warrant a full hearing.
Well-
So that it's not a mandatory thing, but a consideration.
what about that it would routinely be every 6 months review or on petition by the patient for a hearing or a review?
Mhm.
That seems like if they would be locked into looking at that patient every 6 months, but if the patient wanted to do something in between, they could petition the board.
Mhm.
I have to leave, guys, but I'm sorry, but I think perhaps we're saying, because I think we are kind of mixing the two things. So I think I'm clearer now, and I think I appreciate it. So on the one hand, we want to say currently the PSRB reviews all patients every 2 years. And we're recommending that interval be more frequent, perhaps as frequent as every 6 months. Separately from that, we recommend that any patient may petition the PSRB for temporary release or release whenever. Is that the two things we're kind of saying?
Those are the two things we're discussing. I think there might be some middle ground, but it's certainly something I think we should return to, because it's not something we talked about before. But the stuff that's outlined in the report is the things that we did talk about before and it kind of landed on. But this is the time between hearings is a new point. So
Should we just?
just wanna give some more
since people have
thought.
to go, should we just figure out when our next meeting is?
Yeah, let's do that. Because I think we need to come back and work on this. Because in one sense, we say we don't want the PSRB to make clinical decisions. And in my mind, the leave from the hospital is the pass from the hospital is a clinical decision.
Mhm.
And PSRB, if we don't think they should be there, then giving that a clinical decision, I don't want to do it now, but I just want people to remember that people in real hospitals get their passes from the clinical side.
Right.
And maybe it would just have to be endorsed by the PSRB. But if you don't have the PSRB and you're saying all clinical decisions should be with staff, that's the quandary.
Well, and if we want to come out and say that we have a majority that questions whether the PSRB should be in existence, then I think that moves it to the clinical. I mean, at some point we have to trust the treatment teams, and we have to have the treatment teams accountable. And what we're doing is we're taking the accountability and the judgment of the treatment teams away from them and putting them in the hands of someone that really seriously has to review someone every 2 years.
Right. So if you look at this, and we'll discuss it at the next meeting, this is where we'll start. On the last recommendation, are we still in sync that the PSRB should be eliminated?
No.
Well, you have your dissenting opinion, but
The last bullet is about removing the arm of the PSRB from the internal movement from max to meet, right? Which was part of that bill that we talked about in concert that Monty had presented. That was an element of that bill. And that was the one point that I disagreed with that everybody else did agree with. But that's not saying, that particular bullet is not saying eliminate it altogether.
But I think we have a majority opinion that the PSRB should be eliminated altogether. I think.
Right.
I don't know.
I don't know. I don't know.
We're
I
going to
haven't
take
heard
that
everybody
up
express their
at our
opinion.
next meeting. which will be when?
Is it the 10th of September, maybe?
Mm-hmm.
The 10th of September is the day before 9/11. Okay, just so you know.
But it's the day before, it's not 9/11, so.
I know, but a lot of the things are being held because there are about remembrances going on, but okay, what I'm saying.
On the 10th for the 11th, you're saying?
Yeah, some people are doing it, but let you 1:30. Do you want to make it 2 hours?
Sure. Do we want to make it on September 3rd instead?
I can't do the 3rd.
Oh,
I'll
okay.
be traveling.
I
All right.
can't do the 17th or 24th.
Okay, so
Better
let's
be the 10th.
let's do the 10.
And we can't start before 1:30 still, is that right?
Oh yeah, I'm tied up from 1 to 1:30. If you want to,
All right, so we want to do, how about 2 hours? Can we do 2 hours? We're doing 2 hours today, it looks like.
yeah, we're almost there. All right, we'll do 2 hours. Did you get that, Bev?
Yes,
Mike, we're going to meet. Is the 10th okay with you to meet? The 10th of September?
Hang on. Sorry, I had someone at the front door. Yeah, that's fine.
And we're thinking of having it from 1:30 to 3:30.
Yep.
Okay,
Let me just make double sure. Yeah, that's fine. 1:30 to
Okay.
3:30. Got it.
Good
okay,
weekend, guys.
all
See ya.
right. And I just want to say, if people have changes to this, they have to have it in before, like the Wednesday before, so we can all see it. Okay? Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Seeing no one, no objections, motion is adjourned. Thanks.